What's up, guys? Hoop Stinker back with a new video. As you may have noticed, I've changed my name officially from NBA Thinker to Hoop Stinker just because I thought it would be the right thing to do. For today's video, I thought I would bring you a different kind of video where I make a tier list where I'm ranking the NBA teams for the next NBA seasons as the following. So starting at the top of my tier list, I have what are championship contender. These are teams that are most likely to take the NBA title next year, which we'll see in a second. We have the playoff bound tier, which are teams that are locked and will most certainly get into the playoff and might even have a chance at winning the NBA title. Then you have the next tier list, which is the fringe playoff. These are teams that will barely get into the playoffs and there will most likely be a first round exit. Then you have the below 500 teams, which is pretty self-explanatory. These are teams that will not break the 500 mark or exceed it, and these are teams obviously that won't make the playoffs. And finally, at the bottom of the barrel, we have at the bottom of the tier, you have the bad or rebuilding team, which is the nicer term that I chose to use. These are teams that have no hope to make the playoffs, and their only hope is to tank to get future good picks. I shouldn't even say tank anymore, because tanking doesn't really work anymore according to the changes that were made. And before I officially start ranking the NBA teams, I just want to say that these are my opinions. Feel free to disagree with me in the comment section below so I know who to block. Just kidding. But let me know, in all honesty, if you agree or disagree with me, which teams should be where, which teams should be switched, and if I overall did a good job in this tier list. Grade me on a scale of A to F. So with that being said, I'm going to start off with the most obvious teams that are in position to contend for a title as early as next year. Those teams are, I'm going to start with the pretty obvious ones. We have the Los Angeles Clippers, simply because Kawhi Leonard and Paul George joined them, who are two of the best wing players in the NBA, not to mention defenders. Another obvious title contender are the Los Angeles Lakers, not only because LeBron or King James is on there, but because they added AD and they surprisingly made some moves that solidified their roster. Not to mention they added some decent bench pieces in Avery Bradley and players like that. Another NBA team who I think are in a position to contend for the title and that many people might not think so are the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets in previous years were pretty much the only team that pushed the Warriors to their limits, and they pretty much replaced Chris Paul with Russell Westbrook, who at this point in his career is much better than Chris Paul. I understand that there are some chemistry concern or issues about how James Harden or Russell Westbrook would mesh together, but I think, as I believe James Harden said this somewhere, he said something like, talent has a way of working itself out, and I think the Rockets are absolutely title contenders. Another team that I think are in contention for the NBA title next year are the Philadelphia 76ers. Listen, I know they lost key pieces in their roster like Jimmy Butler and whatnot, but they added some other decent players in Josh Richardson and even great players in Al Horford, who is aging but is still going to provide the 76ers with some good depth. And besides these four teams, the Clippers, the Lakers, and the Rockets, and the 76ers, another team that I think could possibly contend for the title next year is the Nuggets. I know some people are not quite sold on the Nuggets yet. Oh, sorry guys. I actually forgot to add one more team in the championship contenders. How could I forget? The Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks arguably could have made the finals this year if not for Kawhi Leonard torching them in the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think the Milwaukee Bucks is pretty obvious that they're going to contend for the championship next year. I don't think much else needs to be said. Alright, so now we're moving to the second part of the tier list. These are playoff bound teams that will probably have a deep playoff run but won't likely make the NBA Finals or win the title. Spot, I'm going to put the Golden State Warriors, which many people have written them off just because they lost Kevin Durant. I remind you, this team won 73 games when they didn't have Kevin Durant and were almost had 2 titles without Kevin Durant. So I don't think the Warriors have downgraded as much as people think. Also at the top here, I have the Utah Jazz, who added key pieces in Mike Conley and other players that are going to energize their team. Another team that I think are playoff bound are the Boston Celtics. A lot of people think that the Boston Celtics are not going to go anywhere next year, which may be so or maybe not. It depends on how Kemba Walker elevates Boston Celtic. Another team that belongs here is the Portland Trail Blazers. I mean, the Portland Trail Blazers did lose some key pieces in Seth Curry, Evan Turner, etc., but they added some quality players in Hassan Whiteside, who some people think he's in decline, but I don't think he really is, and adding some underrated rookies in Nasir Little. I think the Portland Blazers are still in position to make some noise in the playoff if all things go right. Another team that I think belongs in this tier is the Indiana Pacers, simply because they were already pretty good last year. That's without Victor Oladipo. If Victor Oladipo comes back, not to mention that they added Malcolm Brogdon, it's safe to say that they're definitely playoff bound and potentially gonna make a deep playoff run. I'm throwing in the Spurs just because they're the Spurs, and it's been like 20 something years where they haven't made the playoffs. So I think they'll make the playoffs. I don't necessarily think they'll make a deep push or be all that great in the playoffs. The last team I think that belongs in this tier are the Brooklyn Nets. I think the Brooklyn Nets are going to be a little better than what some people are expecting. That's without Kevin Durant. I think they'll be at around a 50-ish team winning record, and I think they'll at least make the second round of the playoffs. Further than that, I really wouldn't be comfortable saying that they would, so I think they belong here. Now, the next tier, the fringe playoff team. These are the teams that I think are barely going to get into the playoffs and probably are a first-round exit. The first team I have are the Orlando Magics, who have pretty much a history of getting bounced off early in the playoffs. The next team I also have here are the Toronto Raptors, who I think will make the playoff, just barely so, because the departure of Kawhi Leonard. I don't think this Raptors team is as good as people are saying they are. Another fringe playoff teams are the Miami Heat. Listen, the Miami Heat got slightly better, only if Jimmy Butler joined them, but they also have some promising young talent in Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and even Justice Winslow, who has been developing rather well over the years. Another team that I think is just barely a playoff team are the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons have on numerous occasions barely made the playoff, if not barely missed the playoff. I think they will make the playoffs this year, if only because they added a decent quality point guard in Derrick Rose. Although he has been injury prone for pretty much his whole career, I think he'll remain relatively healthy this year, and Blake Griffin will keep taking positive step towards improving his game. Now, the rest of these teams in the bottom here are either below 500 or teams that are pretty much doomed to fail and whose only hope at this point is to rebuild. So I'm actually going to start with the rebuilding teams. Teams that are obviously in rebuild mode are the Memphis Grizzlies, the Charlotte Hornets, the Washington Wizards, the OKC Thunder, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I think that's about it. Okay, so these are teams that are not necessarily rebuilding, but are not necessarily good enough to make the playoff either. They're kind of like that middle child who doesn't really get the attention they might want. And I think the teams that go there are the Dallas Mavericks. And listen, I understand that they gonna have a healthy Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic, but I think they're at least 1 year removed from actually making it into the playoff, and for that matter, for making a decent playoff push. Another team that I think is just below 500 are the Chicago Bulls. They have some good quality young pieces in Zach LaVine, Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter Jr., and their draft pick in this year's class with Kobe White, but I still think they're 2 years removed from actually making the playoffs. Now, this is a team I think might surprise some people. They might actually, I believe, might be a fringe playoff team, but I also think they're a little too young and inexperienced to make it yet. Those are the Atlanta Hawks with Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, and they absolutely killed this in this year's draft class, drafting DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish, but they're not making it. Knicks. I'd say the Knicks are just a below 500 team. Sorry, Knicks fan. They're not going anywhere anytime soon, although I think their future is much brighter than some people think. I also think this is another team like with the Atlanta Hawks that I think might possibly squeak into the playoffs, but again, I think they're too inexperienced and their chemistry is not really quite worked out yet, given that they haven't really played together. Then finally, I have the Wolves below 500. It seems like this team has been mediocre forever. You have the Sacramento Kings, who are also below 500. Then again, they might squeak into the playoffs with the Hawks and the New Orleans. If anything, I have more faith in the Kings than the New Orleans and Hawks to do so. And then the Suns, who also have a promising young core, but are not quite good enough yet to make it to the playoff, let alone make a playoff push. So this is my power rankings for next year for all 30 NBA teams. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree in the comment section below. Stay tuned for future upcoming videos, and remember guys, to get your thinking on.